Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I thought we would have a look at the Aviation past the developers for April of 2022. We've had a look at the B36J already, but there are a bunch of other ones which we'll cover in this video. Also, another thing to note is the new IS2 event starts today, the Legends event, and you can only complete it in ground battles. So you've got to make sure to get the mission score in ground battles. There are different modifiers depending on what rank you're playing, and also depending on what game mode you're playing. So if you want to be as, I suppose, efficient as possible, you would play RB and then some of the higher ranks of the game. So it's kind of interesting how they're doing it, and hopefully people will get through this event and have a bit of fun with it. Looks pretty nice, so overall, hopefully you get the IS2. Anyway, let's get into the past to developers. The British get a Mustang, and these are some of the earlier Mustangs that Britain could get access to. Basically, the North American Mustang Mark I, the NA-73 and the NA-83 were the first iteration of what would become one of the most well-known Allied fighters of the Second World War. It was powered by a single Allison V1710-39 engine, gave it 1,220 horsepower at 10,000 feet and a max speed of 382 miles per hour at 13,700 feet. The armament consisted of four 50 cal machine guns, the Browning M2s, 2 in the nose and 1 in each of the wing, with 400 rounds per gun. It also had on top of that 4 7.62mm Browning M1919 machine guns, 2 in each wing, with 500 rounds per gun. And also, this made the fighter at the time quite well armed. The Dutch Kindleberger, the president of the NAA, had originally approached Sir Henry Self, head of the Purchasing Commission in the US, in order to sell to the British the new B-25 Mitchell bomber. However, Self had asked whether they could build, under license from Curtiss, the P-40 Tomahawk, and Kindleberger then stated that the NAA could produce a better aircraft with the Allison engine and have it in the air sooner than it would take to establish production lines for the P-40. The commission stipulated armament of 4303 machine guns and a unit cost of $40,000 or below. The NA-73X would fly just 149 days after the contract with the RAF, ordering 320 of the NA-73s, followed by 300 of the NA-83 Mustang Mark Is. So basically, that is the wonderful story of the British stuff. Also, the Japanese Vampires about the T-55 Vampire. Now, in the early 1950s, the JASDF was testing with new models for an all-new general-purpose Japanese trainer. They specifically wanted to see how they could develop their own two-seat designs, either side-by-side or one after another arrangement. The British DH-115 was the perfect model for the Japanese to review the side-by-side configuration, and in 1955 a single example of the T-55 Vampire trainer was ordered for evaluation. This example was delivered in November of 1955 under the JASDF designation 63-5571, one that would follow this aircraft throughout its entire service life. The trainer was equipped with the new canopy style and ejection seats, from which de Havilland hoped to impress the Japanese, and testing of the aircraft started in March of 1956 by the JASDF officers until April, when it was completed. The Japanese didn't necessarily take issue with the Vampire's performance, rather they were concerned about the possible integration of the British side-by-side design with already existing American aircraft that could cause some standardization issues. Japan would therefore only build American-influenced aircraft or trainer aircraft with the one after another seating arrangement. Interestingly though, this would not be the end of this particular aircraft. The JASDF apparently liked the model enough that they were willing to use it for promotional purposes, a recruiting event and public exhibitions. The aircraft did continue in some sort of active service until 1960, seeing occasional use, but it spent most of its time on the ground impressing onlookers. At some point, number 571 was transferred to the first technical school of the JSDF at Hamatsu as an instructional airframe. and number 571 was stored for a time before being on the tarmac once again for public events in the 1970s. It was decided, given the historical value of the aircraft, it would be sent on permanent display at the JASDF Air Park in Hamamatsu in March of 2000, where it continues to be to this day. It's a pretty standard Vampire, having the de Havilland Goblin 35 centrifugal turbojet engine with 882 kilometers an hour of a maximum speed, and also 4 of the 20mm Hispanos. A lot of nations have the Vampire in game, so why not the Japanese? The next vehicle is of Chinese descent, and it's the Qian JH-7A Flounder, or the Flying Leopard as it's known. This is a fighter bomber jet. Ever since the Chinese Air Force manufacturing company called Qian Aircraft Industry Corporation developed or designed the regular JH-7 Flounder that was planned back in the 1970s, because China required to develop a new fighter bomber aircraft because they wanted to replace the old developed aircraft that they built in the past, which was the Harbin H-5 and the Nanchang Q-5. So basically, they wanted to develop or design a new technology that they would use in the future of the PLAAF or the PLANAF for them to hit or destroy targets by using new equipment and also some new technology. Also, they wanted a new twin-engine, two-seated fighter bomber aircraft too, because they wanted to sort that out. And then in the year of 1984, China started to build this upcoming aircraft. When years went by 1988, the company built the first 6 of the aircraft for the JH-7, and the Chinese Air Force first flew it in that year as well. It was revealed and first introduced to the public at Farnborough International Air Show in September of 1988, and later on the JH-7 entered service in 1992 with the PLANAF, but it was not used, or it didn't enter service with the PLAAF. The reason why is because when the first few JH-7 variants were given to the PLAAF and PLANAF for evaluation in 1990, the PLAAF, not the PLNAF, couldn't operate, or they decided not to use the very first JH-7s because it had older technology in it and it had an unreliable turbofan engine that was implemented in the aircraft. The PLAAF had made an agreement that they would use the aircraft they wouldn't use the aircraft unless the company designed or built new engines and also new weapons that it could use. So their plan was to design new features and also technology by the end of 1998, so they'll be able to test it and then be able to enter service with the PLAAF. This eventually changed the JH-7 into the JH-7A, which entered service in 2004, and the PLAAF and the PLANAF still use the aircraft to this day, even though it is quite old. It uses the 23mm GSH-23L autocannon, also the unguided rocket pods of many different sizes. It uses a bunch of unguided bombs as well, plus guided bombs, anti-ship missiles, air-to-ground missiles, and also anti-radiation missiles. It also has provisions for air-to-air missiles in the form of PL-5s, 8s, and 9s. So it has pretty much all the different ordnance options that you would want when it comes to the vehicle. And also, at the same time, it just has a ton of really interesting loadouts. So yeah, this thing would be a pretty decent, strike aircraft, I suppose, with also ways of being able to kill a lot of aircraft. The Italians get a biplane in the form of the IMAM Ro.43. This is one which was used on a lot of vehicles when it came to naval stuff. So basically, with the rapid expansion and modernization of the Regia Marina in the early 30s, in particular due to the cruiser classes, the Zara and the Trento, the need for a modern seafaring reconnaissance plane to be catapulted from these ships became very obvious. And in 1933, a competition was put forth by the Navy for a plane that could cover said role, with 5 Italian military companies partaking in it. One of the competitors was Aeroplani Romeo, an aircraft manufacturer branch of IMAM, which developed the Ro.43 from the Ro.37, a reconnaissance light bomber biplane which had already found success in the Regia Aeronautica, and successfully won the competition due to the vehicle's excellent capabilities, which often even surpassed those of its foreign counterparts, such as the British Fairey Seafox or the Japanese Nakajima E8NE. The Ro.43 was produced in two series, whose main differences were the dorsal gun, which was changed from a Lewis gun to a Breda Safat, and the increased size of the rudder of the 2A series. This floatplane would go on to be used for the entirety of the war, even though serial production stopped after 1940. Its first operational uses was during the annexation of Albania and at the Battle of Point Stilo, though it's mostly famous for being the scouting plane that successfully located and intercepted the British ships in Operation Harpoon, an Allied plan to resupply Malta at the time in the middle of the siege from the Regia Aeronautica and the Luftwaffe. This event led to the Battle of Pantelleria, or the Mezzogiorno, arguably the biggest victory in the Mediterranean for Italy, which there weren't many, which in the aftermath of had successfully sunk 6 British ships and heavily damaging 7 more, while only having one of its ships damaged. The Ro.43 went on to be used as a base to develop the Ro.44, another successful reconnaissance seaplane, and one Ro.43 still exists today in the Museo Storico dell'Aeronautica Militare in Vigna di Val, so you can find it there. It is powered by a 700 horsepower Piaggio PXR. It's able to go 315 kilometers an hour, and at the same time, what it would have is behind the propeller one 7.7mm Breda Safat gun, and also a turret with one Lewis machine gun of 7.7mm or one Breda Safat of 7.7mm. For Sweden, we have the B/J24 and the Saab J27, both vehicles which were never built, and I've got to actually say the actual articles of them are hilarious, just because of the way that it's put, and also all of the information which is all over the place and very contradictory. So yeah, it's a very interesting platform. Basically, if you want the general idea of it, the BJ-24 was a fighter bomber idea, very similar to the Bf-110, but was never finished by the Swedish. But they hardly built any of it. There's only some really plans of it. Basically, the idea was to have a similar vehicle to the TAR-154, and once again, they gave it a ridiculous amount of armament, but just remember, it wasn't built. So this thing was supposed to have 6 13.2mm or 6 20mm, and around about 1,000 kilos of suspended armament as well on it, plus some defensive guns as well on it. There was even for the B-24 itself, so 4 8mm, 2 20mm, 1 13.2mm, an additional 2 8mm on the wings, and also the bunch of bombs with it as well, all powered by engines that didn't exist. So yeah, it's a wonderful machine and a great work of fiction. The J27 is basically a Mustang with a contraprop with the wings of the later tier Spitfires. So it's just a mishmash of different ideas with, of course, a ridiculous armament of 6 13.2mm. And also no suspended armament. It was supposed to use the Griffin 81 engine, which it didn't because it never existed. And it's just, once again, it's a fairy tale plane. And there's a lot of designs like this that Sweden brought out, especially near the end of the war and during the middle of it, because they were worried about what was going to happen, and they started designing all types of crazy stuff. Doesn't actually mean it was ever built or ever tested or ever looked at. It just means that, just like people like Blom and Voss, people have great imaginations. The last one is a MiG-21 F-13, which we already have in the game, but this one is for Israel, and has a pretty interesting story behind it. The story of this aircraft's capturing actually has less to do with the Israeli Air Force, and more so with the Israel's infamous espionage agency, the Mossad. And during the 60s, it was clear, when it came to the information on the new Soviet fighter, it was a very high value, and it was already being delivered in vast quantities to Israel's enemies. And so Ezer Weizman, then the commander of the Israeli Air Forces, requested the head of the Mossad, Mir Amit, to get him a MiG-21. While the task wasn't simple by any means, the Mossad took it on and attempted to recruit Iraqi pilots who would be willing to defect. After a single failed attempt, Mossad managed to recruit a pilot named Munir Redfer, who was a Maronite Christian that had grown tired from his regime's actions in Iraq. After taking careful steps throughout a time period of about a year and a half, in which Munir even visited Israel in secret, the plan and agreement was finalized. Munir would fly a MiG-21 from Iraq to Israel and receive $1 million, full Israeli citizenship, and a job for life as compensation. The plan was enacted on the 16th of August in 1966 in an operation dubbed as Operation Diamond. Munir received authorization to take off in a MiG-21 alone and flew it against his commander's instruction out of the country, avoiding enemy radars of Iraq and Jordan. Once he had reached Israeli airspace, he was intercepted by a pair of Mirage 3CJs who escorted him to land in Hatzor Air Base, to which he made it on fumes. On that day, Israel became the only Western country in the world to possess a flight-worthy MiG-21. So, kind of interesting when it comes to its story, but it would be very similar to the other MiG-21 that we have in the Soviet tree. The only difference it wouldn't just have the NR 30mm cannon, it would also have access to the Shafir 2 AA missiles instead of just the R3Ss, which would give it a little bit of a boost when it comes to its overall flight performance. That's all the stuff past the developers for Aviation in April of 2022. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Merciless Reaper, Jerry Provolt, Megadino King, Professor X1718, Orangetail, Sakoshi Tiger, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, Moxie, B. Young, and Derek R., Barine, Lafouche, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.